Hi, this is Henning from flipnormals.com, and in today's video we are going to be talking about our favorite exercises for improving your sculpting. These are going to be exercises that range from fairly simple things you can do just with a few minutes to spare to exercises that take a few hours to do. All of these are designed to significantly improve your sculpting at a fundamental level, and they're not about improving your understanding of ZBrush or anything like that. It's about core understanding of sculpting. Before we get into the exercises, I highly recommend that you check out Introduction to Anatomy if you are interested in, learning anatomy. This is a course we made specifically for people who want to improve their anatomy for sculpting. So we cover everything from the bones to fat to the most important muscles, going into the anatomical terms, and really making sure that you get a good understanding of anatomy. So getting started with the exercises. The first exercise is a very simple one, but this is a really powerful one. The point of this exercise is to improve your sculpting technique. So what we're doing here is that we are straight up just sculpting on a sphere. This is a default sphere that we have just clicked the Dynamesh button on once. So we just have a poly count of around 40,000 and we are just sculpting on this sphere. So when you're learning sculpting, you have to keep so many things in mind. You need to think about anatomy, gesture, character design, your sculpting technique, and a million other things. And that means if you're sculpting a character like this, for instance, you need to think about all these things at the exact same time, which just genuinely is really difficult. So if you're sculpting on the arm here, are you dealing with the underlying bone structure? Or are you thinking about how the skin folds? Or are you dealing with genuinely just your brush technique? And that is tricky to figure out. So this exercise is phenomenal because it allows us to break down the sculpting technique into a simple exercise where you don't have to think about anatomy or character design. The only thing we care about with this technique is to improve our core technique. So we are going to be using the clay buildup and then we're just sculpting on top. This does not have to look nice at all. This is just for you to practice your core technique. My preferred technique for sculpting is to get some general directionality going, and then I'm going to be sculpting across the shape like so. This is not to say that this is how you have to do it. This is just my preferred way of doing it. So it allows me to really get some nice appealing shapes. We can hold on the Alt key to carve inwards. We can use different pressures of the pen to get a harder or softer result. And in general, we can just bring out the volume we want. Now you can see I'm focusing a bit more on directionality, but I'm not trying to sculpt anything specifically. The only thing I'm focused on now is just practicing my sculpting technique. This is something I've been doing for hours and hours, and it's a technique I keep working with my student on as well, where we just focus on sculpting, just focus on carving things out and focus on building appealing shapes. It's a really interesting technique because you can also spend a lot of time on this just noodling around, where you're just genuinely learning more about how you prefer to sculpt because you don't have to think about anatomy, you don't have to think about character design. We're just dealing with sculpting technique in the abstract, which is a phenomenal way to improve. So we can hold down the Shift key and we can just smooth down certain parts. And the goal with this is that we do an exercise like this, then we throw it in the trash. We're not going to show anyone the results of these studies. We are just doing this for our own sake. For me, these exercises are equivalent to doing push-ups at the gym, where it's not about doing the push-ups itself, it's about getting the strength to perform other tasks. So if you are doing push-ups, you don't have to film yourself. You can just focus on developing the strength and use that strength to do more important things. So that's exactly how we are thinking about exercises. They're literal exercises for you to improve your core techniques. So here you can see this is not the greatest thing in the world, but it shows you the purpose of this exercise. Focus on sculpting on a sphere, sculpting on really anything, and just focus on your technique. Next up, exercise number 2. This is all about observation. Observation is one of the absolute key skills every sculptor needs to develop. And the good news about observation is that it's something you can focus on when you're not sculpting. It's something you can do whenever you're on public transport, just looking at people, if you're at the shop, or if you're just about, or if you're just looking at yourself, right? If you have a mirror, you can improve your observational skills. The better your observational skills are, the better your sculpts are going to be. There's a one-to-one connection between that. What we do often is we look at a ref like this and we just try to sculpt it. We're just kind of trying to add some volumes and remove some volumes, and we're just kind of hoping that it works. The problem with that method is it's not particularly analytical, and when it comes to sculpting, we have to be analytical. So I'm going to be showing you 2 exercises now that are really useful when it comes to observation. The first one is that we straight up draw on top of the reference. So we are drawing on top of what we're seeing here, and it doesn't really matter what the anatomy is like. Honestly, at this point, do not worry about anatomy, just worry about what you're seeing. So we're just drawing on top of the ref exactly what we are seeing. The reason you shouldn't worry about anatomy is because your anatomical skills are not as good as what's happening here, meaning that there is no way we can actually understand everything that's happening in the reference because anatomy is just too hard. Anatomy will serve as an underlying structure, which is of course really useful, but it's not the end goal. We need to have observation as a skill to really be sure that we can nail all these things. So, but drawing on top of this, we can really see what's going on. We can kind of distill it in a way. We can try to simplify it down. And then the second part of this is that we draw on top of our own model to try to find similarities with this, or rather try to find delta, try to find the differences between these two. So already you can see that there are differences. So if we notice this line here, this goes like so, and this line goes like so. So in this case, one line goes like this and the other line goes like that. So already there is a difference. So we can also just continue going down here. You see the shape going around the eyeball. This goes far too down. In this sense, it's more horizontal and this is too bulgy. We're seeing a shape that goes like this. This goes too far down as well and it's not broken up. So there are tons of these small little changes that's going to be impacting this a lot more. Also, we can observe here the asymmetry. Notice here how there's a lot of asymmetry. So this needs to go a lot further in like so, but also just smaller things like noticing this line here, this goes around like so, and this line is just missing. Here it goes up like this. Then we have an angle that goes here, or a line that goes at an angle, and here this angle is at this level. Then we have other things, like we can compare it to how broken up this is, and this is a line that goes pretty straight like so, instead of going more up like so. This is a level of observation that's going to dramatically improve your sculpting. This is something that is just so useful because you're truly observing what's happening here. And again, it doesn't matter if you understand the anatomy or not. Sure, it's useful to know as much about the anatomy as possible, but honestly, there is no way for us to reasonably do this. We have to rely on observation. Second exercise within observation, which is really useful, is to, instead of drawing on top of this and then drawing on top of this to compare them, it is to straight up try to just observe what's happening here just by drawing. So we're drawing on the right here on the screen, right? And I'm looking at this area here and I'm drawing here, meaning that I'm not looking at what I'm drawing. This is a bit of a confusing one. But what this looks like is the following. So I'm currently just looking at the reference and I'm just getting in the lines here. The proportions are going to be awful, but it doesn't matter. The point about this is that I'm genuinely just observing what's happening here. This is something you can do in live drawing as well. If you're looking at the model itself and you just want to improve, you can just genuinely look at the model without really looking at your paper. Again, this doesn't match at all at this point, and that is 100% fine because we're just observing. I cannot stress how important observation is as an artist. It's really one of the key skills. It's so easy to make symbols in our brain where we think we know what something looks like, but we really don't. We genuinely don't know what something looks like. We have to observe every single nuance in the reference. And every single time you do this as well, you're going to see new things. And again, this is way off, right? Like I'm way off. The eye is down here. This is what I'm looking at here. This is this eye here. Everything is just off now. But it doesn't matter because this here is not meant to be used for anything. This is not meant to be used for any note taking or anything. This is literally just for you to observe what's happening here. But instead of just observing it, like looking at it, because when we look at stuff, we tend to simplify things in our brain. We are putting down a stroke to it so that we can be a bit analytical about what we're seeing. Relating to this exercise as well, what you can do when it comes to sculpting a character like this is we can also just sculpt this into our character. So if you're seeing a specific line, you can just break it down and just sculpt it in. This is a bit like what we just did, just that we're just forcing in these shapes into our models. So we're just straight up just going in and forcing these shapes in. This is a really useful exercise as well. Notice that I'm not using symmetry at this point. So we're just blocking these shapes here in and just forcing in the shapes that we are seeing. Really, really, really useful stuff. We can also just get in the shapes we're seeing here, just blocking this in. We can just focus on this. So just straight up carving in what we're seeing. This is something that has dramatically improved my art in recent years. Just fully focusing on observation, forcing in the shapes I'm seeing, not worrying about the anatomy of it, at least not to a large degree, and then just forcing in what's here and dealing with the anatomical issues later on, because you are for sure going to screw up some of the anatomical features as well. So we do have to take that into account, but not when we are just doing this observational pass. Always a little tip as well before we finish this exercise is the tool is called Epic Pen. Epic Pen is the best tool I've found for drawing on top of the screen. It's what I use for absolutely everything. Epic Pen, everyone, super useful. Exercise number 3 is a bit of a different one. This is about speed sculpting. Speed sculpting essentially refers to doing a sculpt within a certain time frame and saying that you have a maximum amount of 20 minutes, an hour, 3 hours, 5 hours. It doesn't really matter exactly what the time frame is. What matters is that you do have a definite time frame for what you're sculpting. This is beneficial because this means that you get to refine your workflow significantly. It's really easy when you're sculpting your characters to be highly analytical about it, and that is of course useful, right? You keep going in and you start to focus on the bony parts like the cheekbones here. You focus on all the specific anatomical features, and you have to do that to some degree, right? You block in the teeth and you block in all of the structures when it comes to the cartilage of the nose, all these kind of things. The problem with this is that this is an exceptionally slow method of working. This would be like if you are trying to write a sentence in any language and you need to construct the sentence first in terms of thinking about the verb, the object, the subject, all the kind of stuff. This is not a viable way of doing it. If you're making a piece in a professional manner in a studio or freelance, you need to be fast. You straight up just need to be fast. If you're going to construct every single thing, it's not viable. So what we need to do is we need to just get faster. One of the best ways to get faster is to focus on speed. Really just set a time frame for your sculpt and focus on that. The advantage of that is that you really learn how to combine all the steps into a more of a holistic workflow where you really focus on finishing a sculpt. So this is from a stream I did about a year ago or so, and this is Lilith from Diablo. And this is really focusing on getting all the things ready. If you are realizing that after 3 hours you've only done this part of the face, well, then you are in trouble when it comes to your workflow because you're not focusing on important things. So one of the key objectives with speed sculpting is that you get to finish the whole thing and you get to learn how everything is combined as well. If we're looking at a character like this, we learn how everything really fits together. It means that when you're sculpting something like this, you need to bring in the hands and the feet and the gesture and the head and everything instead of just focusing on one specific thing. This is something that's easier to do, where you tend to focus on maybe just the structure of the nose or the structure of the eyes. But honestly, that is not the most important part about sculpting. What's really important about sculpting is the flow of everything, is how everything connects up in a nice manner. It's how the proportions work together. It's the gesture of things. It's not just about having a nice structure for the nose or having a nice structure for the eyes. While that is important, it is not the most important part. You need to learn how everything connects up. Some examples of speed sculpt you can do could be make a realistic head and you have 2 hours. Can be sculpt a nose, 30 minutes. Sculpt a full figure, you have 30 minutes. The time frame isn't really the most important part because each time frame is going to teach you something different. If you only have 5 minutes to sculpt a full figure, you are going to have to focus on the gesture. You cannot focus on the bony parts. If you have 5 hours to sculpt a head, you can really get into a lot of detail. So it's really important to focus on different parts of that. You can also do creature designs as well. It can be focusing on sculpting an alien, sculpting on trolls. Like in this case, this is my little fan sculpt from Styx, the video game. So it really is about that. Focus on speed and focus on how everything connects up. Exercise number 4 is all about learning anatomy, and we are going to be using an anatomy model that ships with ZBrush. If we go to Lightbox, you can hit the comma key as well, tool, and open up the Ryan Kingsline anatomy model. This is a phenomenal model for learning anatomy. This does ship with every copy of ZBrush. Double click it, and this is going to load the model. If you go to solo mode, I have a custom hotkey for this, which is the 1 key. You can just see the skeleton. If you alt click on any one of the models, which is how you switch subtools easily, you can see the specific name of them. So this is a phenomenal model to use for anatomical reference, because you genuinely have all the muscles and all the major fat pads and all the bony parts and all that. Now, how does this relate to the actual exercise? Well, the exercise is quite simple. We are going to be doing 2 sculpts. We're going to be doing one sculpt without any reference. And we're going to be focusing on one part of the model. This can be, for instance, learning the arm anatomy. And then we're going to be doing another sculpt afterwards that is with reference. And this is going to be of the same thing. So let me give you an example of this. So let's say I want to learn the arm anatomy. What I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to be focusing on what specific part is it. So we can say that it's everything from here and down. I don't really care too much about the hands, and I just want to learn about how the shoulders, the upper arm, and the forearm connects. So what I'll do is I'm going to start to sculpt this up. You can either do this as one main subtool, which is totally fine, or you can start to block these muscles into individual subtools as well. Both are perfectly fine. I'm going to do this as one subtool for now. So I'm going to just start with this. I'm just going to make this into polymesh. So I'm just going to make this the upper arm. Then I'm going to duplicate this one, and I'm going to turn this into the lower arm. I'm not going to do the full exercise now, because that would be quite nuts, because that's just going to take a lot of time. But in general, this is how I'm approaching this. So we just turn this into Dynamesh. So we can just mesh this together. And now I'm doing this genuinely without reference. I can just duplicate this one here, so we have this for the second one. So I'm doing this without reference at all. This is purely for me to exhaust my anatomical knowledge. So what I'm focusing on now is going to be that, okay, let's assume that we know some stuff about the anatomy. Here we're blocking in the bony part, so we're getting in this part, we're getting in the bones that go down here. We know we have a humerus that goes up here, so we're just blocking this kind of stuff in. Just keeping this simple, right? So we're just focusing on trying to learn the anatomy, but learning without reference. Usually you want reference. Why on earth am I doing this without reference now? The advantages of learning without reference is that you truly get to see where your mistakes are. So now we blocked in something simple here in terms of anatomy. Let's try to get some of the muscles in here. So we're just getting in the deltoid, and then we are getting in the tricep. That is kind of like here, right? And then we can block this in with some specific things, some specific shapes. We're getting in the bicep that goes here. We're getting this in here. We're getting in the brachialis. It goes here. So I'm just rushing ahead, right? The point about this is that you just need to do this from memory. So after you're done with this exercise, you are going to see all the mistakes. You're going to realize that most likely you don't really know too much about anatomy. I've done this with a lot of students in the past, and honestly, this here is often how far they get. They might be spending 2 hours on the study, and they genuinely can't do any more than this because they don't have any more anatomical knowledge to draw from. And why is that? Well, it's because anatomy is really hard. So by focusing on doing this without any reference, we get to truly see where we went wrong. So this is the maximum amount of knowledge I have about anatomy. Let's say that is the case for sake of argument. Then we can now take the full anatomy model. We can merge her down. So we can just do a merge visible, and then we can go up to the model. We can copy paste this into our shape here. We can start to block this out. So we can just try to make this more or less the same so that they fit in terms of scale. We can kind of do this. We can move this up like so. And then we can do the split screen view. If you don't know about this feature, this is going to blow your socks off. So if we go under transform and split screen, set this to 1, this is insanely useful because this means that we can now see the reference at the same time as we're seeing what we're doing now. And you can see I'm way off. And that's fantastic because this means that now I get to sculpt this again, but with proper anatomy ref this time. So what I can do, I can go in here and then we can just start to focus on what I did wrong. So essentially the goal here now is to sculpt the correct anatomy. It really is to try to get in the muscles in the correct spot. It's really trying to modify my anatomical knowledge so that we can use this knowledge for all future sculpts. This is one of the best ways I've found to improve my anatomy skills. I made the Intro to Anatomy course last year. That was the one I was talking about in the beginning of this video. And for that, I had to learn a significant amount of anatomy. I've been sculpting for a long time, but man, you always need to learn more about anatomy. It's a never-ending journey. So this is one of the main techniques I use for really improving my anatomical skills. And this is something I still do a lot. And this is something I do a lot with my students as well, because this is such a good exercise. It's a really daunting and really hard exercise, but it's a phenomenal way to learn as well, because you genuinely are putting down everything you think you know about anatomy into a sculpt, and then we get to immediately feedback it. This is also a way to feedback stuff yourself, because you don't need somebody to tell you that these muscles here are wrong, because we can just kind of look at the ref, right? And we can start to focus on this. If you want to do a hardcore version of this, then you do the full body and you do the bones as one subtool and you do the muscles as one subtool, meaning you do one subtool per muscle and you name it as well. This is going to drastically improve your anatomy, because the first one you're doing most likely is just going to be really bad. The one you're doing without ref is not going to work, because frankly, when you're starting out, you're just not going to know that much about anatomy. How could you? Anatomy is insanely difficult. So even if you get some of it right, that's fantastic. But every single time you do this exercise, I can guarantee you that you're going to improve as well. Every single time you're going to internalize some of this anatomy, and you're just going to get a more intuitive understanding of this. So why do we even care about understanding anatomy on a level that's intuitive and not just, why don't you use just reference for everything? Well, the reason is that you can't really do it from a practical point of view. You have to internalize a lot of anatomy, because otherwise it's just way too slow. But also because you're going to be missing a lot of the flow of sculpting. So if you can kind of block out an arm that's like somehow anatomical, then you can spend all your time making sure this feels like the person you want to sculpt. So now we can remove the reference and we can just see the differences between the two arms we sculpted, and you can just see like the delta between the two. This is not the greatest arm in the world by any means, but it hopefully shows you the point of this exercise. So again, to reiterate, this exercise is quite simple. You sculpt something from memory. You'd really do your best. Take this up to the highest level you possibly can without any reference. If you really want to go hardcore, break down every single muscle into its own subtool, name it as well, like specifically name it, because this way you're forced to realize what you don't know. Then once you are done with that, then you do it again with reference from scratch, and then you name all those pieces as well. And every single time you do it, you are going to get a little bit better. The next and final exercise of this video is to do master studies. Master studies means that you are doing specific studies of somebody of really high skill levels work. So in this case, we have the David by Michelangelo. And the cool thing about a lot of these old sculpts is that they're available as scans. So this is from My Mini Factory. And you can just Google My Mini Factory David and you can find this sculpt. This is perfectly free to download as well. And you can just bring this directly into ZBrush. And it's really cool that this is available directly as a 3D model, because you don't have to interpret photos or anything like that. You can see the volumes exactly as Michelangelo made them. Caveat to this, not exactly, because these are often processed a little bit afterwards. So some of these scans have been processed by somebody who doesn't really know exactly what's going on. So there's some funky stuff going on here, for instance, but totally fine. In general, this is a great resource for doing these things. The most important things when it comes to these sculpts is not necessarily the anatomy per se. Honestly, a lot of this anatomy is a little bit wonky because this is done before we had anatomy books. These are really, really old. So modern anatomical knowledge from art books and anatomy books is going to be better than what's being done in these sculpts. But the gesture and the appeal and how the shapes flow is going to be absolutely masterful. There's also a lot of stylization in this as well, so you can learn a lot from that. So the way you could do these studies is straight up using the split screen like we did before and just start to block in a character. I really do recommend doing these with asymmetry as well, and then you just focus on trying to recreate these sculpts as closely as you can. This is really, really difficult because these are excellent sculpts. If you're focusing on Bernini or Michelangelo or anyone like that, that is really difficult, but it's also really worth it because you do get to truly see how they solved a lot of things. You don't have to do master studies based on old sculpts though. You can go to contemporary museums and you can find really cool sculpts there that have been done in the last few years, or you can look at digital artists as well. Like if you want to learn how Raffaele Grassetti sculpts, one way to do that is to try to recreate one of his sculpts. When you're doing that though, I highly recommend to not put any of that stuff in a portfolio piece because that's going to look like you're just trying to copy somebody else. But what you can do studies of somebody's art. Like people have done studies of my own art, for instance, and totally fine. Maybe ask them for permission beforehand. But if you're just doing that as a study, just, you know, in your own version of ZBrush without showing anyone, you can pretty much do studies of anyone's work because it's just a study. It's just seeing how somebody else did that. Just be careful that you don't claim them as portfolio piece. So doing this is phenomenally useful. And as a little bonus tip as well, this is not really about specifically how to sculpt. This is about a bit of a framework around sculpting. Treat sculpting as an exercise, like going to the gym. Schedule in time for it. You can set this to something like 20 minutes a day where you just do exercises. Where if you're doing a portfolio piece or you're trying to learn sculpting, you're trying to make something that's interesting, set aside a few minutes and just do some of these exercises. This can be that you're just sculpting on a sphere for like 10 minutes, or you're just trying to do parts of the arm without reference for like 20 minutes. Every single thing you do in terms of these exercises is going to really improve your skill level. It's not like doing one arm study is going to just unlock the secrets of the arm, but just doing 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there over enough time is really going to help you significantly when it comes to improving your sculpting. So yeah, that's it for these tips. I really hope you enjoyed these 5 tips plus a little bonus tip here, and that this improves your sculpting. Let me know what tips you have for improving your sculpting. What exercise have you done that has significantly improved your sculpting? Let me know in the comments, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in future videos.